Good morning and welcome to Coffee Time with Kauffman, the comfortable place to talk about women's leadership. Today, we are talking about authentic leadership. But before I get into that, my name is Maria Kauffman and I'm a life coach. And today's coffee is a dark roast from Costa Rica, El Tigre. Let me get that up for you. I love it because it reminds me of Costa Rica. It is certainly a dark roast, and that is certainly one of my favorites. But I love it because it kind of sounds feisty. El Tigre. We are in a bit of our winter blues time frame. Here it's the end of January. It has been a bit cold, which is pretty normal. I'm in Pennsylvania, so we have been in a couple of little snowstorms, if you will. There is snow on the grass. It is cold enough that when it's time to go check the mail, it's not something that I run out the door to to embrace the experience. So I know some people have been experiencing some of those winter blues. So the idea of Costa Rica is very warming to my heart. I have been to Costa Rica. I have drank plenty of coffee in Costa Rica. It does not compare to what I can do here in Pennsylvania to recreate that experience, because Costa Rican coffee is pretty wonderful, and so is Costa Rica. So hopefully the idea of Costa Rica, whether you've been there or not, brings you some warmth and some cheer and maybe even some feistiness. So today we are talking about authentic leadership. I find it a pretty interesting topic because it is something that I hear from place to place rather frequently. And it has definitely struck a chord for me for many reasons. So what I'd love to do is just to kind of tickle it apart a little bit and get into a bit of a discussion about what that may mean to anyone and everyone. So first of all, I like to just kind of break it down into the two words that it is: authentic and leadership. So leadership to me, I always start from a place of personal leadership. So because it is personal, it by default speaks to the idea that it is unique. Regardless of who you are the leader of yourself. Who else is really leading you, right? So the other part of that is authentic. So if we tickle apart the word authentic, there is kind of the polar opposites, right? Being truly authentic and being inauthentic. And by nature of the definition, I'm sure I don't need to explain to anyone what that may mean to you, but I do find it interesting that that word can really use some exploring time. And whenever I talk about exploring time, I am talking about let's sit under a tree and think about this for a little bit. So I'll kick off the conversation just to touch on those two words separately and from a couple different perspectives. And then I want to just kind of get into what I'll call three segments of a general human life. All right. So what we'll do is we'll start out with the early leadership influences. I don't know what that may mean to you, but certainly for me, and let's just take people in general. So when we're very, very young, our leadership influences are most likely going to come from the adults that are taking care of us. If that's, your mother, your father, your grandparents, whoever those adults are that are raising you through those early years. And hopefully for most humans, there's an opportunity to go through the education system. And as I step through these three segments, in very, very general terms, I'll talk about 20-year chunks. So when I talk about early leadership influences, my brain wants to go to elementary school for, as my first experiences outside of my family and the normal adults that I may have run into before I started school. And then those formative, very, very formative years of being in school. I know a lot of people will look back to elementary school and they certainly have a favorite teacher. Elementary school teachers typically tend to be, very, very sweet natured and patient. Even just looking back and just understanding who would get into that profession to want to be a teacher, got to have a lot of patience and certainly a love for children. As you help them get educated and form them in those early years. So I definitely stand out. There's a couple of standout experiences from those years that speak to authentic leadership. So for me, math was definitely something that was very, very natural for me to excel at. So as a very young girl, finding that was very authentic for me. It was natural. It was tapping into my purpose and passion probably in life. I had no idea at the time. I just knew it came easy to me and it was a joy to do math. Now, what I also found out in those early years was that math was actually socially something that I did not want to authentically claim. Of course, when I was little, I didn't have that kind of language. I just knew that my friends were very, very critical of the smartest girl in the class. And they judged her and they criticized her in a way that made me feel like I could not express my math skills, my love for math, and that part of me in an authentic way. So we start in very early ages to run into what I'll say are these boundaries that make us hold back from our true authentic leadership. So those are the early years, and actually those situations in elementary school formed me in such a way that attitude, and I'll say that inauthenticity, definitely carried with me for a very, very long time, if not certainly through all of my education system. So the other part of that was there were moments where you could not script it, where I would just step into my passion. And here's a very, very specific example of when we would do a game called Around the World. It was a math game. It was a math flashcard game. And my competitive side, my math side, my true authentic side couldn't help it. As soon as the teacher would say, this is the activity that we're doing, I was wholeheartedly true, authentic Maria. And I would want to win the game. Absolutely. Anytime we're doing a competition on math, problem solving, I'm in. And I couldn't hold back in that part of me that said, "Oh, I need to hold back on this part of me because I'd rather be accepted into my social circles and downplay my intelligence," was definitely more favorable. But once again, there's those moments where you just can't help yourself and you are definitely going to be the authentic you. So those are the early years. Career influences. By the time I got to high school and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my career, and I always knew I was going to be a career person. So there were also interesting boundaries there that I felt that I would run into, right? So part of that was what else was I going to do with my career? Knowing that I wanted to go for a career and certainly having an understanding, especially back, 30 years ago, If you looked around, that was a time when so many people had very, very long careers. I mean, you went to work for a company and you were there until you retired. So that certainly informed me at those early stages of starting my career, was the idea that, wow, I need to be very cautious on what I choose here because this is something that I'm going to be doing for a very long time. And I think that happiness is a natural part of the formula. Certainly for true authentic leadership, the best way to be authentic is to understand what makes you happy and to seek the activities in life that are going to make that come true. So I had to follow engineering because that certainly was the prominent career choice for me. So once again, though, it did pose, certainly in my situation, many, many times once I got into my career situations, my employers, a lot of times I was the only woman in the room. That definitely formed me on some levels that I couldn't even understand over decades probably worth of time. On some level, certainly working, in a career, you want to please your boss or you want to please your employer. Certainly that's part of keeping a job, right? Is performing in a way that is suitable to the environment. So part of that may feel at times like it's inauthentic. Like you may differ in an opinion from what your boss wants to do or the direction that the company's going to go. But in order to maintain that employment status, you are going to act in a way that might feel inauthentic. Although this is part of the places where I like to explore authentic leadership as a general topic because I think it's layered. There's definitely a layer in not only the happiness and success piece, but truly the result of what the results are. So ultimately, life gets complicated and there may be additional reasons why you have a career, why you're living out your passion. And I think that there's just kind of like these boundaries that play with our authenticity and inauthenticity. I'll add here that I think there's a time, like a time account, similar to a bank account, right? The more time you spend in authentic leadership, the more authentic you're going to feel. And there's probably also an intensity about it as well. So for the most part, let's say 80% of the time, you are doing what you love and things fall into place and it feels just fine. And maybe there's 20% of the time where, it doesn't feel great and it may not be completely what you want or living in your passion. But over a large period of time, and if we're talking like 20 years in general, generally you want to be doing or to be in authentic leadership, the majority of the time certainly would represent being in authentic leadership. So I'll get to the third piece because I think it kind of ties in a little bit of the time component and the difference between, maybe being in authentic leadership and inauthentic leadership. And the last one is mature influences. So those early years, if we talk about them in that, those early years were a 20-year chunk between the time, you're born and about the time you're getting out of the college years. Maybe for some people who are not going to college, that just means that they're already into their career. Generally about 20 years for those formative ages. And then there's the career influences. Once you get into your career, there's so much to learn. There's so many influences that you want and that you need. And that all plays into, I believe, this constantly developing what I'll call is a more mature influence of your authenticity or your authentic leadership. Because that's a bit of how it relatively works. Something magical happens about that 40-year mark where you've had a good 20 years of education and 20 years of experience in a career, 40 years of living life. You really start to grow, I believe, in what is true, authentic leadership. So you really understand what is either making you happy. That might be a time where there's an opportunity to say, you know what, this career that I've dedicated my life to, the results have been good. Maybe that has been your revenue stream and provided for a lifestyle to have a family and to go on vacations, right? All these things are that time depository of where part of all of your authentic leadership really is going into. So something naturally kind of happens at that age of 40. Maybe ideally you've been in a career path that was nicely chosen for you and you continue on through that career and really own a whole nother level of authentic leadership. That's the place where things certainly start to feel easier. There's wisdom that comes along with authentic leadership, right? And part of that is that balance between your education and your experience in a career to bring that kind of wisdom into the world. And it's incredibly valuable, regardless of how your career has gone, whether you've been in one career, you've jumped around different employers, different jobs. That 20-year career segment is vastly valuable and contributing to your ultimate authentic leadership. So here's what I like to say is that true authentic leadership, the only thing that you really need is a fingerprint, right? So being yourself is really, and owning your own leadership style is the only authentic leadership that needs, or let me put it this way. I love to equate authentic leadership with feeling comfortable in your own skin. And that's where the fingerprint idea resonates and comes from, is the fact that there's only one person that's been walking around in your skin your entire life. And there's a fingerprint to prove it, right? It goes with you and it is as unique as you are. So I like to think of mature influences as this whole other place that I wish somebody would have told me about very early on. And maybe it's just a sign of the times that things are very, very different now. I think technology has definitely opened up a completely new world for us to explore life and leadership in a whole new way. I love how there's so many different books that we have access to. Even when those books are talking about the same thing from different voices, it adds such a rich color and texture to what informs us and what influences us. And certainly in our more mature ages, we can discern and we can say, oh, I like this because of this reason. And now you feel more confident because you've lived this life and for many, many years that maybe you're more confident. I always get enamored by influencers and authentic leaders who are very, very driven from such a young age. I think a lot of things go into that recipe. And part of that recipe, I would have to say, is what makes authentic leadership. Part of that is your natural skills and talents, whether you know them or not. The earlier you find those natural skills and talents, the better. Your passion, what really lights you up, and your purpose. And what are you good at, right? So natural skills and talents, certainly. But I think there's a reflection in the world too, that when you're good at something and it has a certain value to it, people are going to start to give you some level of feedback that adds to that, right? So, if I was good at math, but I didn't see any reward in it, it wasn't going to add me any value. It probably would have fallen off, my table, if you will. So that's a little bit about my perspective on authentic leadership. Once again, the biggest thing that I love to talk about is just, how do you walk around in life? How comfortable are you in your own skin? And with that is, how much of your day are you spending in that comfort zone, right? Because that will speak to it. Part of that too is being a true authentic leader sometimes means that you're pioneering a whole new trail, which is definitely going to get you out of your comfort zone. So there's being that comfortable in your skin to put yourself into situations that are not comfortable is a driving force. That's when I believe you really know you're tapping into your true authentic leadership in your mature years, and whatever that means for you. That could mean that it's at 20. For me, it's certainly coming, what I'll say is later in life, because through my education years and through my career years, there were so many influences that were challenging me and keeping me within some level of boundaries where I felt that I didn't have the freedom to play to some extent. Those scales certainly have chipped. Those scales have tipped. And now in my mature influences, but what I also want to add there is that the fact that I was sensitive to the idea that there are these boundaries, and I kind of knew that I was holding back on some of my math potential early on for some other reasons, all of those still add to it. Even the times when you are feeling uncomfortable, I believe those are moments that are informing a future version of yourself to be more authentic. So in the end, my words of advice, maybe an inspiration, is that there's nothing to worry about. Take it all in and just let it inform you. That information, regardless of how of the nature of it, is definitely going to inform future versions of you, always building on authentic leadership. I think it's a natural phenomenon that we're all driving toward, because I think in the end, it's all driven by some happiness. And with that idea, I do have a closing inspirational quote for you from Ayn Rand, and it goes something like this: "You can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. Learn to value yourself," which means fight for your happiness. Those are the words from Ayn Rand. Thank you for being a part of the conversation for inspiring women's leadership. Coffee Time with Kauffman is the comfortable place to discuss women's leadership, because I am on a mission to help the world discover the truth about what women are capable of. When you are ready for your leadership mastery makeover, go to mariakaufman.com and click on Consult a Coach, where you can schedule time with me for an empowerment session. Have a great week. Enjoy your adventures and journey responsibly. Bye for now.